Welcome to the 49th reading of my memoir, The Innocence of Guilt. Another move and a new obsession. Early in 1960, W.O. Peak Limited merged with Aqua Scutum of London. They decided to sell our house and the two adjacent houses to the council, as several years earlier the council refused them permission to demolish and extend the factory because of the house's historic value. Despite that claim, the council announced they were pulling them down and building offices on the plot. We, along with the other two families, were offered council houses to rent on Monkwick Estate. Against my mother's wishes, my father refused for the second time to move into a council house and looked for a house to rent privately. In August, the five of us moved into 64 Wickham Road, a 15-minute walk south of Colchester Centre, close to the army barracks. The landlady lived next door, so she could keep an eye on us, Mum said. A red brick Victorian terrace row house on the end of the row, a passageway separating us from the house adjacent to it, as well as the small brick-walled front garden where Mum could at last grow the flowers she loved. The long back fenced garden allowed plenty of room for the same. Dad bought a cedar shed to store our bikes and his tools in. We still had an outside flush lavatory, but it was outside the scullery door instead of at the end of the garden. Two small rooms downstairs and two rooms upstairs, with a small box room off the larger one. Every room except the box room featured an Edwardian fireplace, but Mum wouldn't allow any of them to be lit except the living room one. So no real improvements to our home comforts. Still no bathroom, but for some time, despite the stigma attached to such a place, I took a weekly bath at the public bathhouse off the High Street. The baths were quite an experience. An orderly ran the bath by turning a large metal wheel on the wall outside the room. And if you wanted cold water added to the scalding hot she always ran, you could yell out for her to do so. It embarrassed me to do that, so I always emerged with my skin as red as a lobster. What I liked about the baths, other than the bath itself, was the singing that took place on both the men's and ladies' sides, a mixed choir. The baths were a happy place. Our new house was small, with no attic, so Mum gave Din the small box room. She gave me the room across the landing, opposite my parents' room, and David had no choice but to sleep in the front room, downstairs. I never thought at the time how fortunate I was to have my own room. Tradespeople knocked regularly at the front door, giving David no privacy at all. Now I lived farther from the factory. I rode my bike each morning to work. I loathed getting up, as my emotions were at their lowest first thing. Rainy mornings were especially miserable, and if Dad hadn't taken my bike out of the shed for me, I would have been late for work every single day. He pumped up the tires and kept my bike in good working order. All these things I took for granted, never giving him one word of gratitude. Din was not too happy. He felt trapped, not only in his little box room, which he had to go through my parents' room to enter and exit. His freedom had been curtailed since Mum forbade him to ride his bike. He'd fallen off it while riding in the rain, so it was confiscated and hung up in the shed where he couldn't reach it. Mum said that at almost 84 years of age, he ought to accept that his cycling days were over. but he ranted and raved against her decision and was angry for some time. The cattle market and the park were quite a distance for him to walk to, but he did slowly. David left school and took up an apprenticeship at Paxman's, the engineering company he had talked about joining for the past year. Mum was thrilled that he had passed his O-levels and was well on his way to a great career. I was full of jealousy over how she appeared to fawn over him at all times. Such hopes for him, and none for me. But what hopes did I have for myself? Life at the factory continued on in its boring fashion, and I made no attempt to embrace the work for its own sake. Only the means to an end, the pay packet on Friday. I abhorred the whole factory atmosphere, and although I did make friends with a few of the girls, the friendships didn't exist much beyond the factory walls. By and large, my workmates considered me unstable and overly sensitive. If I had a reputation for anything positive, it was my ability, as at school, to know all the names of the film stars and which films they currently starred in. Considering that most weeks I spent my earnings on the latest fashions and tickets to 3 films a week, no wonder my mind retained such details. I lived in a fantasy world and expected the real world to live up to how life played out on the silver screen. The pop songs of 1960 promised nothing better for my precarious love life than the songs of the year before. The lyrics kept me grounded in the surety of nothing but pain and losses in affairs of the heart. Or did I only cling on to the ones echoing those? The childhood nightmares continued, although they weren't filled with scary monsters anymore that lurked behind rocks and threatened to attack me. I'd be running down a dark alleyway at night, pursued by a dark figure I mostly identified as my father. I'd done something terrible, and if caught, would pay the ultimate penalty, death. One night, I woke up drenched in perspiration, hands squeezing my throat. I could barely breathe, and as I struggled to break free of my assailant in the darkness of my room, dimly lit by the street lamp outside, I thought I saw the shadowy outline of a man. As he released me, I sensed he left the room quickly. Certain the man was my father, come to kill me, as he so often threatened he would. I shook with fear the rest of the night, huddled under the thin security of my army surplus blankets. When morning broke, my throat sore from the attack, I ventured downstairs, trying to convince myself it wasn't my father who had tried to strangle me. Could a bad dream be capable of leaving me with such a vivid after effect of terror and physical discomfort? My relationship with my father was bad. We barely exchanged a civil word between us. After the scissors episode, he laid his hands on me less often, but his words left far more devastating wounds to my soul. My words to him must have been as lethal. We were slowly but surely destroying each other. On the positive side, I still attended church and youth group, and although the end of the year left me still without Patrick, I entered the new year of 1961 with some excitement. In early February, the Saturday night youth group changed its focus from the casual drop-in atmosphere to something new and challenging. The opportunity to join a musical troupe called the Eld Lane Minstrels, based on a popular TV show. We rehearsed every Saturday night, and the performances were held in various homes for the elderly and handicapped. Later on, as we gained more experience, we charged admission to fundraiser shows in the church hall to further our cause. The Old Lane minstrels filled a huge void in my life, and I lived for Saturday nights as never before. Rehearsals became a new addiction. Unlike most of the youngsters at church with either satisfactory school studies or a happy home life to balance them out, I had nothing else going for me, and therefore threw myself into learning the routines. Unfortunately, I paid a price for going up on the stage. Panic attacks kicked in every time, and performance night became a double-edged sword, my stomach riddled with nausea, body taken over by trembling, both of which I battled in order to do what I loved. Unfair that I suffered for something which brought me so much fulfillment. I never conquered the nervousness, but I never stopped trying. In March, I underwent believer's baptism, along with several other members of the youth group. I'd been christened in the Church of England as a baby, but believer's baptism signified my adult belief in God. It also claimed to wash me of all my sins and have me emerge as a new person. Gwenda and Joan from the factory came to witness all the fuss. Not interested in regular church activities, they were curious to see me dressed up in a long white gown, lead weights sewn into the hem, being publicly dunked into a tank of water. Afterwards, they chuckled at my previously carefully arranged hairstyle plastered down on my head, completely ruined, and me face beaming, not caring for once how I looked. That impressed them, if nothing else did. Reverend Bailey had asked me to give a short testimony of my faith journey. Although I wrote it all out and rehearsed the metaphorical story of my former self as a runaway car without brakes, at the last moment I couldn't get up the courage to do it. Disappointment clearly showed on his kindly face, and I suffered immense guilt at letting him down. My baptism meant a lot to me, and inwardly I feared he would think it a sham because of my failure to proclaim it in words that day. What to do? I could stand up on the stage, singing my heart out with the minstrels, and yet couldn't tell the congregation, my mother, my friends, how God prevented me from crashing into a brick wall at the bottom of a hill. How could I explain that when the fear engulfed me, it was so powerful? A fire coursing through my body. No choice but to run before it consumed me. Even the water in the baptismal tank hadn't been able to quench that inferno. Thank you for listening. Please feel free to subscribe, like, or comment on this reading, and hopefully you will tune in to the next one. Bye for now.